Israel's ambassador to London, Mark Regev, is here in the studio with me. But first, just let's listen to the UN human rights spokesperson, Rupert Colville, speaking earlier today.
A number of the demonstrators did approach the fence, threw stones and Molotov cocktails at Israeli security forces personnel and flew kites laden with petrol-soaked material. Some tried to damage the fence that separates Gaza from Israel. Others burned tires. Israeli forces responded with tear gas, plastic bullets, and various types of live ammunition, some causing horrific wounds and lifelong disabilities. We stress again, lethal force may only be used as a measure of last, not first, resort, and only when there is an immediate threat to life or serious injury. An attempt to approach or crossing or damaging the Green Line fence do not amount to a threat of to life or serious injury and are not sufficient grounds for the use of live ammunition.
Well, let's just therefore question that. I mean, he says there were not the grounds to use live rounds at that moment.
We use live rounds when it is necessary to protect our people. It's never the first option, but it has to be something in your toolkit if you want to protect your public from terrorists who are trying to storm the border.
Having it in your toolkit is quite different from unleashing it on a large crowd of largely unarmed people.
I reject the premise of your question. No one unleashed. We were very surgical, as careful as one can be in a difficult combat situation.
1,360 wounded people, many of them in hospital, with appalling injuries.
So there were over 40,000 people in these riots. We had people charging towards the border with wire cutters, with explosives, with petrol bombs. They were trying to break into Israel and, frankly, to kill our people.
Whose lives were at stake at that very moment?
Our people's lives.
Which are people?
Israeli citizens.
But where were they?
We have civilian...
Where were they?
I'm answering your question. We have civilian communities immediately adjacent to that border. We have farms, we have townships within half a kilometre, a few hundred metres from that border. It's our obligation to protect our civilians. And let's let the Hamas people speak for themselves. They said, the leader of Hamas said the goal is to penetrate into Israel. He said to cut out the hearts, to kill the Israeli civilian population. Obviously, we have to protect our people.
Yeah, well, that's the sort of sloganizing that you are very used to from Hamas.
We shouldn't take those threats seriously, John?
So perhaps we shouldn't take the UN seriously when they say an attempt to approach a crossing or crossing the fence does not represent a threat to life or serious injury. There are not sufficient grounds for the use of live ammunition.
We would say the following. If you are trying to cross into our country, destroy the security fence, and you've declared your goal is to kill Israeli civilians, I think that's a threat that we would be irresponsible not to take seriously.
Well, what would you say to the family of Mahmoud Sahwali? He's 12. He's in intensive care. He's just finished his first school. His elder brother was with him when he was shot. They were driving 500 metres away from the fence. Is there any excuse for him to be having to have a brain scan now for a bullet that entered his head?
It's a tragedy. And I don't know exactly what...
Doesn't sound very surgical, does it?
First of all, we have no information whatsoever.
If you have no information, how can you be surgical?
No, you don't have information either, though. How this young man, this teenager, this child, how he was injured. You only have the story that you are told, and I understood the father from the report is obviously an activist supporting the Hamas struggle here. So I think one has to be careful.
Well, it's unlikely that anybody living in Gaza is entirely indifferent to the struggle as you describe it.
Well, people of Gaza, as your reporter said in his own report, live under the very hard fist of the Hamas government, and nothing really can happen in Gaza without Hamas's approval.
I mean, one is tempted to ask, what would an attack that was not measured and was not surgical, what would that look like?
We wouldn't want to see that, obviously, but the main thing for us is...
No, perhaps you'd describe it.
Describe what, sir?
What would an attack which was neither measured nor surgical, what would it look
Well,
like?
the sort of thing Hamas does, to indiscriminately fire into a crowd, to throw explosives into a crowd, the sort of things Hamas would
But
like
that is actually precisely what the Israeli Defense Forces
not
did.
true, sir.
There was no
Not,
targeting
sir.
here.
That's not,
People
that's
were
not
just
even,
hit.
That's not even close to reality, sir.
But you could see it from the very pictures that everybody's transmitted around the world. How is it that a British minister, one of your friends, the large volume of live fire is extremely concerning. We implore Israel to show larger constraints. That's Alistair Burt, the Foreign Office Minister. You never hear a British minister criticising Israel on that level.
I think we have to be clear. Israel was facing a direct attack on its border, once again with a self-declared goal of Hamas to come into Israel and kill our people. We had to defend our border. And I'd ask the following question. I think it's a legitimate question. We know what Hamas says about Israelis. We know that Hamas believes that every Israeli civilian is a legitimate target. We know this is a terrorist organization recognized as such internationally that has a track record of brutally attacking and killing innocent civilians.
Well, as you want to talk about Hamas, are you prepared to respond to their offer to join in independent investigation into what has happened?
How does Hamas do an independent investigation?
No, they're prepared to join it. It will be independent.
Yes, but
it will be independently run.
I'm very happy to hear that, and that you believe them.
Are you happy to join it?
Tell me, what checks and balances are there in Gaza for there to be any sort of independent investigation? I'll ask you the following question. Can someone stand up and tell a Channel 4 reporter, you know, Hamas are terrible, we want them to leave? You can't have independent demonstrations in Gaza.
That is not the question I asked,
No, but it is relevant,
sir. The question I'm asking is, at what point will you ever talk to Hamas?
No, but first of all, I want to finish that point. It needs to be said. How does one have an independent investigation in an authoritarian theological society where there is no independent civil society?
That there is any independent entity that could hold an inquiry at which they would listen to you and they would listen to Hamas. That's the nature of an independent inquiry. Do you trust the United Nations to hold such a thing?
Quite frankly, how does one find objective information in a society where people who speak out against the leadership will face violent retribution?
Finally, you describe Gaza as a prison, which is surrounded by Hamas, a prison that is of Hamas.
No, I would say Hamas is a prison and the jailer is Hamas.
Right, OK. But it is, in fact, Israel that contains Gaza, will not let anybody in or will not let anybody out. That is your authority that does that.
We control our borders, and we have to control our borders because precisely
But you know better than
Hamas.
you know better than I that Gaza is a cesspit, and quite literally. The sewage system has broken down. Power is all but absent. I mean, can you imagine the lives of 2 million people? This cannot go on.
And who is responsible for that?
You and the Palestinians.
I disagree entirely.
Two together, and you need to talk together.
I don't accept that. Of course, Israelis and Palestinians have to talk, and we have to find a way to make peace. But for you to say you have a regime in Gaza that invests its energy and its time...
I know you've told us that, Ambassador. In fairness, you have.
No, but let's see. I haven't said something that needs to be said.
This is the last point.
Thank you. We have a regime in Gaza that puts its energy and its resources and its program into its so-called holy war against my country, instead of worrying about schools and healthcare and the development and jobs of people in Gaza. That's why the people of Gaza suffer. The people there are the victims of a regime that puts its extremist ideology above and beyond the interests of the people.
Ambassador,
That's the truth.
Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
My pleasure.